They brought her into the simulation room, but it was not the normal setting they were used to. The genius young strategist and her team of clone cadets had been training feverishly for over a week. The members of the child cadre hastily drawn from the best test-scoring clones in their fields. They were often moved from place to place, but their simulation room, where they trained for the battle that was fast approaching, had only changed twice. Once near the start, and now today. It was smaller, more compact and advanced, or so it seemed to her. The many young clones who had trained around her to aid her facilitating her purpose sat in stations all around where she was destined to stand. Each bald boy wearing interface head packages and focused on their consoles. The support stations in the previous training room had been in large, circular areas which moved and rotated to simulate potential battlefield conditions. These were fixed, small, and sunken into the walls and floor of the relatively cramped space. It looked serious, military, real. Wiping her eyes, Omega looked up at Nala Se. A clear question held there, though her yawn smothered it somewhat. Nala Se's passive face betrayed nothing, but she began to answer the unspoken query nonetheless, not bothering to wait for Omega to draw in another breath for the obvious question. This is the special command ship we will use in the future when you are performing your duties for the Republic. It is called the Oracle, and when in service, it will allow you to directly coordinate fleet resources, just as you did in the simulator. The tall, slender alien said as she escorted the youthful, albeit sleepy, clone to the entry point leading onto the command mat. Omega paused to stretch, already dressed in her proper interface command suit, which was not so different from what she normally wore.
So, does that mean I'm on a real mission this time?
Omega asked, both excited and nervous at the prospect, but Nala Se dampened her reaction with a shake of her head. Omega had been made to fight in tens, if not hundreds, of different Axum-oriented battle simulations. Sometimes she had larger fleets, sometimes very small ones. Sometimes she had new ships, and sometimes the ships she faced were entirely new, a scenario which had become completely routine after the third day. Achieving victory had been hard, but not impossible. However, the maneuvers and choices it had required of Omega weighed heavily on her, in spite of the fact these battles had been naught but simulations. The prospect of cruelly spending the lives of her brothers in actual combat haunted her more greatly with every passing night. No, today is your first time using this system, and we are still testing the viability of the Oracle and the surrounding crew of clones. You will be running a high-intensity training mission against the enemy you have been contending with. The objectives will be laid out before you, as per usual. It will be up to you to decide how to approach and the tactics used by the Armada. The Kaminoan lied. Omega sighed and smiled, finishing up her brief stretch. Another simulation, another point-scoring exercise. Disturbing as giving suicidal commands was, it was no different from sacrificing a piece to gain the advantage in a game of Dejarik. At least, as long as it was not real. But something else also stood out to the altered clone.
Oh, an armada? That sounds like a lot of ships this time. Is this the full fleet simulation?
Omega asked, grinning at her caretaker as she stepped up onto the soft, black footing of the circular command mat, taking the special gloves and headset that rested there and placing them on. Yes, this new system is powerful enough to fully simulate your likely future encounter, which will be very soon. It has been upgraded to provide a hyper-realistic scenario meant to take you off your guard. Nala Se continued to lie.
But this is still just more training?
Omega clarified, adjusting the headset which ringed her forehead and then looking at her creator. Nala Se paused, blinking slowly. "Nalase?" Omega asked.
"You are ready, Omega. This is not training for you. It is fine-tuning for the rest of us. If you fail here, then all of these clones, this equipment, and even myself will be replaced. The crew around us will be separated and redeployed. This ship will be pulled apart and remade, and you will be put in the care of another, one who might better facilitate your preparation."
The cloner lied. Omega's expression fell instantly, her pale face paling further, eyes widening.
Wait, but why? Haven't I been doing good? I won 4 of the last 6 encounters.
The clone pleaded suddenly. Nalase nodded sadly.
"You have done excellently, Omega. Better than I had ever predicted. And the others in the program agree. Thus, if there is any deficiency in your performance, it must not be due to you. It must be caused by something around you. We are nearly out of time. Soon the Republic will call upon you, upon the Oracle. In that time, the whole system, not just you, must be ready."
The cloner said, further explaining her fabricated rationale.
"But you and the rest of the team, you are part of my system."
Omega admitted, her voice soft, defeated. Her creator reached down and stroked her chin, pulling her gaze back up.
"Then you have everything you need. I believe in you, Omega. Deployment time is in 45 minutes. All the data you need is at your disposal,"
she said. Omega suddenly rushed forward and hugged the Kaminoan's leg, taking Nalase by surprise, but only for a moment. The alien resting her long-fingered hand on the human clone's back.
"Will you be nearby?"
Omega asked.
"I will be watching from the bridge. Now, Omega, it is time,"
she said gently, the mutant clone pulling herself away from her foreign creator and looking up at her, nodding her small face in a resolute way.
"Okay, I won't let you down,"
she said, saluting before stepping back onto the black control mat. Nalase watched on for a moment, and then turned around and headed back out through the doors, Omega's command platform elevating to be between all the clone stations around her. It was a circle of vibrant blue, red, and green holograms which lit up in concentric rings around her, gradually resolving into the finer details of the coming engagement. Standing on the circular mat, she seemed to float amidst the data, queuing up and dismissing reports, maps, and various displays with her hands and thoughts. Soon, Nalase was watching from the cameras on the bridge as Omega and her cadre of clone teammates discussed which of their many devised approaches they would choose to engage the presented enemy fleet. Half of them busy marveling at how enormous their given force was. Lama Su came to stand just behind her, his calculating eyes narrowed.
"You chose not to tell her the truth.
This is no test. If she does fail here, there is a good chance we may not survive it, both before the battle's conclusion and after, if we survive to face the Supreme Chancellor." Admiral Tarkin was clear on his expectations for the Omega Command initiative, and what would become of it if it failed to deliver on your promises. The alien statesman said, voice cool and dispassionate.
"Omega is ready in all but one way,"
Nalase said in response.
"We made the clones to act as a unit, a cohesive whole. Because of this, it is often the case that harming one will harm the entire pod in some way. Omega is a variation, but she is not far removed from this programming. In fact, I suspect she may be especially susceptible to it. Most of our own dedicated command clones have demonstrated difficulty in issuing orders which are sure to result in large quantities of their forces being killed, even if the result would be a projected victory. What is being asked of Omega is many times the magnitude of that,
she explained.
And you fear that if she were to know the real cost of her tactical decisions, she would be unable to perform her function?
Lama Su asked. Nala Se shook her head.
I suspect it might impair her willingness to deploy the most effective tactics. We have been training her in simulations, and her results have proven more than adequate for the Republic's needs. However, altering any aspect of the parameters we have been operating by may alter the results of her performance. All I have done is ensure that our operational parameters remain as close to those within test conditions as is possible.
The chief medical officer of Camino explained, once more lying, though not as much as before. Lama Su considered and then seemed to accept what she had told him with a gentle sway of his head.
And is that why you threatened her with the removal of her system? I certainly hope the extra pressure does not alter those testing conditions too much,
he said, looking up and away from Nala Se, who shook her head in response.
I felt it appropriate to invent some pressure to stand in place of the reality of the situation,
she said, looking up as well, seeing through the windows on the bridge and casting her sight out across the absolutely massive Republic Armada. That stretch of winding ship steel reached beyond what even her keen eyes could process, as more and more vessels aligned themselves into the fighting ranks of the Grand Navy Palpatine had created. Those monoliths of war bathed in the many colors of the nearby sun. Glorious and deadly, the clones of Kaminoan design marching and working within each vessel like the life's blood of massive beasts. An army worthy of the supreme chancellor of the Galactic Republic. Or rather, his new supreme commander whom they were departing to retrieve. It was hard for Nala Se to imagine that the mailed fist of the Republic's might, gathered as it was, could be defeated by anything. But then again, she would have thought the same of the entire KDY defense fleet, and the President made even her cold blood chill further. But only slightly. Looking down, she refocused her attention on her creation, who grinned at the clones around her, corralling and organizing them, getting them on task.
All right, settle down. I think I've got a plan. We need to get in close, right? And we can only jump into the system here, here, and here, yeah? Well, what if we split up the fleet like this, and we came in from here?
The young clone said, waving her hands in conjunction with her thoughts and drafting up three-dimensional displays of plans for the others.
Yeah, that would force them to angle. No way to engage without that. But once they do, there's nothing stopping them from just lighting us up like stars at range,
said another of the clones.
But that's the trick. That's why we split the fleet up to jump in here and here. Once the enemy starts to angle,
Omega was saying, moving the holograms into action with a push of her hand.
Whoa, we'll have them right where we want them,
exclaimed another one of the children. Nala Se reaffirmed her resolve. Every single one of the life forms in the command center were purpose-made for this. Designed for leadership, for agility of thought, creative approach, and competent command. Her science was not wrong, and their force was larger than any she'd ever seen gathered. The numbers could not lie. Failure was impossible. The only question now was at what cost would victory come? To win one battle and lose 2 wars was no true victory at all. But those were thoughts that she put aside, and left for the likes of the Supreme Chancellor and soon-to-be-recovered Commander. For the Kaminoan, just making sure that they could begin to roll back the slew of recent losses would be enough to worry about.
There are so many, the censor's officer muttered from his station, his eyes straining in the dim light, his luminous screen lighting up his stunned face in sickly green luminescence. There, displayed in grainy but legible resolution, were the signals for thousands upon thousands of enemy vessels. Individually, most of their ships were less than half the size of proper cruisers. But with numbers like these, it would take nothing short of a miracle to succeed. And that sentiment was written clearly upon the faces of most of the bridge crew. They had been to hundreds of engagements, and they knew a lost cause when one presented its snarling face to them.
"Rally, warriors of the throne!"
boomed the voice of Rola Senduran, Lord Admiral of Battle Fleet Zektek. She stood in front of her command throne, her sheathed naval saber held in both hands before her like a cane, its end pressed into the steel floor, giving her posture an air of irrefutable solidity, as though she were the avatar of her own ship's implacable prow.
"We are superior, for we are the Emperor's cold sword and his burning wrath. The enemy we face is numerous, but pathetic. Their weapons are weak, their range paltry compared to our own. Get me firing solutions on those approaching ships. I want to start pelting them well before they come into the proper combat zone."
She ordered, the room moving at her command, even as she continued.
"Make ready the Godsbane lances, arm the Nova cannons, and prepare to fire!"
The Lord Admiral demanded. "Lord Admiral, we cannot attain firing arcs on the enemy," reported one of the gunnery officers. "Their ships are clustering and sheltering in the shadows of various stellar objects, including several of the system's planets and asteroid fields. At their current trajectories and rate of approach, they will be most of the way to us by the time we can get any kind of clear firing solution on their vessels." The reporting man went on.
"Damn, I guess they're not suicidal this time,"
Rola grumbled, rubbing her cybernetic chin, perfectly disguised as no more than her own familiar flesh. Her augmentations went to work, helping her remember past battles, giving her flashes of both victory and defeat, helping outline the key aspects of each. She had 3 centuries to draw upon, and she knew she would not get many more, no matter how much of her body she replaced, or how many juvenate drugs she chose to pump through her brain. It was a strange despair for her to see her own death and service slowly but surely crawling into her sight, in spite of everything. But the one benefit, if there was indeed only one, was simply that she was standing upon more dedicated combat experience than her enemies were likely to have. Aside from that, she was more than a fair tactician, even before her many wars had forged her into what she was now. Her largest impairment here was how little she knew about this Galactic Republic's tactics. In their first engagement, half the enemy fleet had charged, a quarter had scattered, and another quarter had remained frozen in place. A hesitance born of indecision, she suspected. But she also suspected that she would not face the same incompetence in this theater. The approaching fleet was undeniably coordinated, and was now working to intelligently mitigate their previously exploited weaknesses. This time, she was not facing off against a confused and divided force. This time, the Republic had a plan. The key now was to recognize it and pull it apart. Gradually, yet not too slowly, an engagement scenario began to form in her mind. Her Mechanicus implants helping her to calculate the most precise angles of attack to accomplish the first bladed thrust of this star dance, which had only barely begun. Split the fleet into 9 battle groups. Ensure each group has a battleship or cruiser with a proper array of deep-ranged batteries or armaments. She began to command, sitting back upon her immense throne, saber sitting across her lap as the fingers of her left hand began typing her calculations into the console mounted into the armrest. I am sending precise positions for each one. They are to arrive and wait until the hostile fleet crosses into far range, and then begin synchronized firing patterns, engaging with appropriate force as the enemy fleet draws closer. They are to hold nothing back! Rolla ordered, the crew moving even as she spoke, accomplishing as much as they could, knowing time was of the essence. Lastly, instruct all fleet admirals and captains that, as the enemy approaches mid-range where I've designated, they are to begin to fall back while facing the enemy and continuing to engage. They should angle to arrive at these fallback coordinates simultaneously, which will allow us to meet the bulk of their surviving fleet as a single, unified force. We'll sink our claws into them and then slowly slit them open. The Emperor will not find us wanting! With those words spoken, the commands went out, the vast yet limited Imperial battle fleet beginning to part and separate as they were bid to. All the while, the silver nebula that was the massive Republic fleet churned and sorted itself, approaching from behind the shelter of comets, asteroids, and planets, all moving by the hand of the Dark Lord's latest prize. Soon, the stalwart pillars of Imperial power would be pressed against the bladed mind Palpatine had purchased. The old would now face the young. Experience would test genius. Wrath would be tempted by play. And sordid sin would face cruel innocence. And the distant gods would laugh all the while, their hungering voices expressed in the gathering rage, the stirring of ambition, the knowledge of death, and the anticipation of the great atrocities, both shrieking from the near past and rearing from the coming future, which were yet to be. The final moments of the drama at Axum were about to commence.
Are you sure, Master?
Asked Aurelian Tex, the company captain looking dubiously from the face of his lord to the silver engraved tablet the chapter master held delicately between the ceramite fingers of his Terminator armor. Am I sure of what, Captain Tex? The man asked, Orion's golden eyes fixed forward, staring into the blast shields which protected his bridge from the warp and its possible predations. Davik Thune was content to ride naked in the warp, trusting in his faith to provide protection. But Orion insisted on following the book on this, even if a part of him did ache with curiosity. He had received reports of the strange happenings on Davik's vessels when they went into the warp without even their Geller fields, and, most notably, how imminently survivable it had been thus far. But no matter how curious he was, it was a bridge too far. Perhaps several.
About doing this, sir. This whole mission is predicated on the Circle of Vigilance. To call them a questionable source is an understatement, and that's even before factoring in their general vagueness and cryptic nature.
Aurelian said, his tone stubborn, almost insubordinate. In response, Orion looked back down at the silver tablet in his hand and read from it. On Crimson Hand the die is cast, and chaos is the dice. Its number is 3 from 6, and it repeats 3 times. The gate is opening, and chaos is the night beyond, endless in its own shadow. Only the heirs of knowledge can bar the gate and stem the flow of daemonry, and only by Imperium wrought may they find the gate and stem it. The path ahead is golden as the throne, blue as the desert sky,
and bladed to all who touch it, but it must be trodden. The first step has been taken, and it has fallen at the Azure Gate. The second step must now land upon the heart of the universe, and with great force it shall be struck. By striking the heart, the wound shall be readied, and from it shall rise the cause of the Empire. Seek then, O Master Shepherd, the heart of the universe. Strike deep, strike true, and be wary of your greedy mercies. The heart can be captured, but it cannot be held. Any who attempt it will be destroyed with great force by the gilded hand of fate, which is cruel and kind and black as the night. It reaches out even now, tall and growing, born on two shadows. By its permission does the Emperor rise. So say we, Council of Vigilance, our vigil ever in the warp, 18 eyes made one, eternally at your service and at the service of the Imperium.
Aurelian's stance betrayed what his helmet hid from plain view.
I take it that was not clear enough for you,
the chapter master said with the slightest quirk in his lips.
Not by a long shot, sir.
Captain Tex confirmed.
Then it is a good thing that you do not need to understand, only to be ready. I have depended upon the cryptic intelligence of the Council before. Every word they speak is a riddle, and every riddle has an answer. I found that answering those riddles is often easier than it first appears, at least with the proper context. And with each answer, something invaluable is gained.
Orion explained to the young captain.
So then, have you solved this riddle, Master? Is that why you deployed the sector and chapter fleets?
Aurelian asked. Orion nodded his large head.
And the heart of the universe, this thing we are supposed to destroy, it's at Axum?
The captain went on. This time, Orion shook his head.
No, Captain. The heart is not at Axum. Davik Thune took the first step on our path within the Axum system, but we shall take the second step. And as with any second step, it must take us further, all the way to the heart of the universe, all the way to the core.
Interesting. They divided themselves up into 9 fleet groupings. That's 3 more than I had hoped they would, said Omega, standing within the globe of holographic tactical displays, the enemy highlighted in red, the Axum system painted in 3-dimensional detail all around her. But they're still angling into the predicted places, even with only 6 of those new, smaller fleets. That should be enough, right? What do you think, 1224? She asked, directing the question to the clone working from the tactical station embedded in the wall to her upper right. He did not look up, hands tapping and clicking, but he answered quickly nonetheless. As long as we keep it smooth and in sync, it shouldn't be too much of a problem. We will have to reposition our main fleet quickly, though. There will be no room for delays if we still want to keep more than the primary elements in fleets Beta through Zeta, he advised. Well, it's too late to turn back now anyway. Let's do it, Omega said, cracking and shaking out her fingers before snapping them with 2 clicks, bringing the display to direct command attention. Alpha Fleet, begin withdrawal. Fleets Beta, Gamma, Delta, Epsilon, and Zeta, move to assault positions and prepare for hyperspace jumps, she said, moving her hands to send the relevant coordinates to the proper fleets. In response to her thoughts, the data and interface presently before her, as well as her sweeping directing fingers, billions of tons of spaceborne steel began to move, tilt, and reorient. The primary in-system fleet pulled itself to a halt about 1,000 meters short of the predicted distance engagement range of the Imperial ships, and began to turn. Begin Operation Axum Omega, now! "40 seconds until the Republic fleet reaches the outermost engagement range. All applicable weapons are aimed and ready to fire," reported the thickly set weapons officer, who turned and added a brisk salute with his words. Rolla nodded absently at him, her eyes trained on the updating hololithic display which was being presented before her command throne. The Republic vessels were advancing from a very specific approach, but in spite of that, it had taken her only seconds to calculate the best angles to move her battle groups to in order to catch the incoming Republic ships in what would become a lethal crossfire. Everything was going as she had predicted, at least so far. So why did something feel off? Why did she have the sense that something was missing? Something which should have been in plain sight? From where was her unease coming from? Was there a hidden danger right before her eyes? Perhaps a traitor in their midst? She looked away from the floating displays of holographic green light, eyes cutting across the deck, moving over the backs, shoulders, and faces of her bridge crew. She sought viciously for anyone who was not meant to be there, for any break in normality or otherwise suspicious behavior. Rolla scanned once, then twice, and on the third time realized that there was nothing there to see. 30 seconds to range! The weapons officer called out, now facing his station and looking down into it intently. The bridge space was an ordered, if dark, cavern of steel, adamantium, and ancient technology. Her various officers sat or stood at their stations, most augmented in some way, either to patch an injury sustained in their long careers, or to increase the capacity they had come to rely upon. She did not keep servitors on her bridge, and so none were present, though a couple of tech priests whom she trusted did man 2 of the stations, their metal bodies swarming with titanium tentacles, which at times seemed to fuse the men into their alcoves. The crew was right where they were meant to be. The price of dignity, her Oberon-class Imperial battleship, was in position. All the vessels of her battle group were. Everything seemed to be going smoothly, the ship around her even appearing to strain less under the constant weight of its ancient age. She could barely hear the whir of the battleship's corrective thrusters. In fact, she could not hear them at all.
Engine check! What are the conditions of our maneuvering thrusters?
She snapped out.
Checking systems.
The man who passed for the chief engineering officer called out, red robes rippling with extra limbs. The tech priest was executing his diagnostic even before he spoke the words, having anticipated the completion of Rola's command halfway through her issuing it. In mere moments, his various mechadendrites had begun going to work, interfacing with the complex station he was manning. The tech priest's flesh and blood eyes twitched and vibrated as tens of data streams filled the dozen or so screens which curved around him, absorbing the presented information as it passed. His bony, withered hands tapped and clicked in a rapid frenzy all the while.
20 seconds!
Came the call from the weapons officer.
All systems are nominal, Lord Admiral.
The tech priest reported a moment later, ceasing his movement, the data streams frozen, having surrendered the knowledge he sought.
Then why can I not hear them? How are we holding in a stable firing position without the thrusters?
Rolla shot back. Several officers on the bridge began to sort through their data for answers, their instincts and habits honed to never doubt the questions or methods of the Lord Admiral herself.
My lord, I found it! Our fleet grouping has entered into a Lagrange point. The gravitational stability of this area of space is enabling us to maintain our position with minimal adjustment from the maneuvering thrusters.
Came a reply from the navigations officer.
Was that not your intention?
She added a moment later.
No, this was just the optimal...
Rolla stuttered for a moment, the information catching her completely off guard. The enemy, who had occupied this system for thousands of years, may well know where to find those kinds of locations. But her fleet having just arrived would have taken hours of stellar observation, perhaps days or even weeks, to accurately predict where any but the most stable of such points would exist. Overall, it was a good thing. Firing from a Lagrange point allowed for optimal stability at minimal systems effort, and it would enable her ships to leave the system at will should they need to.
10 seconds! Weapons beginning final priming! Cycling is set!
Continued the weapons officer from his standing post. Rolla felt the instinct to sweat prickle across her artificial skin, sensing that familiar chill which foretold disaster. She had taken this position with her ships because it was an optimal firing angle, not because she was aware of the Lagrange point being present. Her half-mechanical mind had given her the most logical locations to attack from to maximize the range and accuracy of her vessels, while moving them a minimal distance from where they had begun. Falling into a place of relative gravitational stability was just a happy accident. Or was it?
Fleet Vox, send an information request out immediately!
The Lord Admiral ordered.
Aye, ma'am. Your orders!
Confirmed the comms officer.
They are to report the presence of any similar Lagrange points in or around their positions, and they are to do so as soon as humanly possible. I have a bad feeling about this,
she said, watching as the message was relayed electronically.
Engaging enemy in 3, 2... Hold fire! The Republic fleet is slowing to a stop!
The weapons officer reported.
Confirmed! High-intensity auger scans are showing uniform firing of retro thrusters across the entire fleet. Detected coordination capacity based on the action is near 98%. The Republic ships have halted 23 meters short of the combat zone.
In spite of those reports, the ship around them still rocked, several of their primed weapons going off nonetheless. It was an act which was repeated across the various Imperial battle groups, the enemy having stopped so close to the battle line that several Imperial captains had failed to forestall their crews quickly enough. The sporadic spray was mostly ineffective, with only 1 or 2 positive strikes with the lances and a handful of about 7 vessels being destroyed by one of the 3 Nova cannons which had fired. Thankfully, that stuttering first volley was not followed by a second, as the Imperial guns held, waiting for the Republic to continue its advance. Instead, it began to do the opposite.
Enemy vessels are reorienting. They are vanishing,
came the report from one of the sensor's operators.
By the throne! They are retreating! All of their ships are turning around and departing the system! Lord Admiral, they are fleeing rather than face us!
Said the officer, to the obvious joy and then cheers of most of the bridge crew. But not Lord Admiral Rolla.
Admiral, information reports are back,
called the communications officer.
5 of our battle groups, not including ourselves, are currently situated in or near in-system Lagrange points. 4 of these are of an unstable nature but appear cohesive at this time,
he said. The words were like ice on the Lord Admiral's thoughts. What were the chances of that being a coincidence? Had she subconsciously sent them to those positions somehow? No. She had no control over the overlap between those points and the optimal firing angles to combat the Republic vessels. The only things which would control that were the positions of the stellar objects in the system and the chosen approach of the enemy fleet itself. A fleet which was retreating after coming to a halt just outside of their combat range.
Damn it! We've fallen into a trap! She spat, standing up and sweeping her arm out angrily. Order all battle groups to fall back to the...
Rolla began to order before suddenly, and without warning, there was an odd sound, like a deep thrum or buzz. Then, the previously starry black view of space which had dominated the viewports of her bridge was consumed by the instantaneous appearance of an enormous, mottled gray hull. Deep trenches lined with turrets formed the complex texture of the monstrous vessel which had appeared before them, and massive red symbols lined in golden coloring were written across the silver skin. For a dreaded instant, there was no action, only an eternity of horrid, suspended anticipation. Then, the instant died as the hull before the ship came alive with flashes of blue and green. The turbo laser turrets mounted across the Republic battleship, turning and orienting to spray thick torrents of light from their many enormous emplacements. The price of dignity trembled and shook all around Rolla, sparks flying from overburdened conduits as the shields began to rapidly compensate for the sudden burden being slammed upon them.
Report! What is happening?
Admiral Rolla bellowed, keeping her feet in spite of the bucking deck. The sensor's operator screamed as his console released a torrent of roasting electricity, his still writhing body hauled out of the way by the man beside him. That same man replaced the now former officer, who lay trembling and waiting on the ground for the Medicaid workers, who soon entered the bridge and pulled him out. The new sensors operator stuttered for a moment as he stared down into the sparking, recovering instrumentation, before clearing his throat to report what he saw.
Enemy fleet groupings have emerged all across the system. By the throne! They've ported in! Right on top of us! Of course!
Rolla finished for him.
Which battle groups are not currently engaged?
She demanded.
Battle Groups 3, 9, and 6 are currently still in position and unaffected by the enemy ambush. By the Burning Throne, Lord Admiral, that Republic battleship in front of us is 8 kilometers long. It's as large as the Dignity and almost twice as wide.
The officer answered.
I can see that. Are there any more like it?
Rolla shot back.
Yes, 3 more like it. All with those Republic glyphs written across them. They're all in different parts of the ambush, so this is the only one we are currently facing.
The man said.
Good. Get an autotrans working on those glyphs. I want to know what they say, if they say anything at all. Order fleets 3, 6, and 9 to converge and liberate fleets 8, 7, 5, 4, 2, and 1 in that order. They will gather strength as they go. Leave no Republic ship standing and tell them to make haste. That main fleet may have retreated for now, but it's only a matter of time before they circle around and come back to finish us from a different approach. We must be ready.
The Lord Admiral of Battle Fleet Zektek ordered.
Orders are sent. But Lord Admiral, we are Battle Group 1. Why are we being rescued last?
The comms officer dared to ask. Rolla turned towards him, her face contorted into a predator's bristling grin.
She whipped out her naval saber, kicking the sheath from the blade and allowing the finely honed sword to glare with reflected green light as she scythed it through the hololith before her. Her nearly crazed expression bore luminous markings created by the reflecting broken emerald light as she aimed the saber towards the gray hull which blocked her view. Because the other battle groups do not have my ship to defend themselves with. The enemy may be vast, but their vastness is nothing compared to the teeth of my Emperor's Oberon. Tell the astropaths to stop their singing and begin their screaming. Scramble all wings of bombers and fighters. All assets are now at war. Hold nothing back.
She proclaimed.
From choir and navigator to cannon and prow, spare them nothing. By the time our rescue comes, we will have ensured that we do not need it. To battle, warriors of the Emperor! To war!
Their Lord Admiral commanded, her crew saluting and shouting obeisance to her will and getting to work.
Ma'am, the autotrans is back,
the communications officer reported.
And what does it say?
She asked, still standing, eyes fixed on the vessel before her.
It reads, the Pride of the Corps. It appears to be the name of the ship.
Rolla allowed her disturbing grin to widen into a frenzied smile.
The enemy sent their pride against her, sought to smother her under cunning, numbers, and their newly revealed weapons.
The fools failed to realize that the Grox fights twice as hard when its back is against the wall, and thrice as hard when openly challenged. And she was far more lethal than a Grox.
Then let us see if their pride can overcome the price of dignity. They will regret closing this distance with us. But they will not feel their regret or anything else for much longer. Fire the engines! Brace the crew! Give me ramming speed!
Kuat of Kuat watched the proceedings from his command chair in the center of the bridge. His eyes narrowed in cold affirmation of what he had already known all along. Kuat was supreme, and when its engineering might was fully brought to bear, even the petty constraints of the Ruusan Reformation could not hold them back. His family, his firm, and his very planet were every bit as dominant as the names he took to be his own. His loyal feelings purred in his lap, blissfully unaware of the carnage raging all around them. His fleet was 4 times the size of that which was presented by the Imperial interlopers, and was led by his own Mandator II dreadnought, the pride of the Corps.
Already, the Imperials were suffering casualties as his fleet followed the instructions given by Palpatine's newest instrument. Just as predicted, the Outsider ships began to fire mostly at his own pointedly massive vessel, which drew attention away from his smaller, more fragile ships, which even then were making use of focus fire tactics to whittle down the fanatic vessels. This was a role the Pride was pointedly designed to excel at. Even stretching the limits of the law as much as he could, Kuat of Kuat had only been able to arm his enormous ship with so many turbo laser batteries, which left it with an inordinate amount of excess power. Power he had ensured would not go to waste. While it was true that the enormous Mandator packed far more firepower than any other Republic warship, its purest strength lay in its shields. Humming powerfully, resonating throughout the ship, Kuat of Kuat could feel it as surely as he could feel the heartbeat of his beloved pet. The shields on the Pride of the Core were worthy of defending a planet, and the various solid and energy weapons the Imperial vessels sent at his ship were deflected harmlessly into space by the absolute might of his Mandator II class dreadnought. And then he saw something which made his own heart quicken. A breath escaping past his lips, hissing out in sudden, exasperated surprise. The largest vessel in the enemy fleet group which he was engaging had finished orienting itself, shifting and sliding its massive bulk through space on rapidly firing maneuvering thrusters. Yet, instead of doing so in a way which allowed it to rain down with its main broadside-mounted guns, as Kuat of Kuat had expected it would, it had instead aimed its prow directly towards the center of his own beloved warship. Just as he began to give credence to his suspicions concerning their flagship's intentions, the mountainous Imperial battleship confirmed them, its engines flaring to life as it made to ram through them from above. "Evade that vessel!" he called out from his center position. "Unable to comply. Our ship won't be agile enough to achieve the evasion at this distance," the human helmsman reported. "Full power is being funneled into the shields," droned the shield operator, a brilliant woman who hailed from Arthuria. Her name was Selimi, and she had been no small help in designing the exquisite shield systems which enshrouded their ship. Though she was a stoic creature, Kuat of Kuat knew well how she relished the chance to test and use her technology personally, and hoped that her discipline would ultimately trump her personal desires. She sat at her special station, manipulating the controls and making the energetic skin around the Pride of the Core flash and flare brightly. Moments later, the wedged prow of the brutal enemy ship collided with the shields, jarring the entire Mandator and pushing it out of formation. The lights flickered and consoles sparked, the visible bubble of protection bending and warping against the biting, glowing hull of the Imperial vessel. "Drawing power from weapons to shields," Selimi said a moment later, her voice still neutral and calm as her hands went about maneuvering her dials and deactivating most of the turbo lasers across the ship. In response, the blue skin around the ship strengthened, and Kuat of Kuat sighed as the Pride of the Core began to stabilize once more, holding fast against the brutality of the Outsider's chosen tactics. "Barbarians!" he scoffed in spite of the small surge of fear their sudden attack had inspired within him. The master of the Kuat family knew well the value of brute strength and power, but the way these Imperials wielded it was savage in the extreme. Still, though he would never admit so out loud, he did find certain aspects of their design philosophy to be genuinely interesting, even inspired. The caliber and variety of weapons the Imperials deployed were outrageously effective, and seeing them perform their deadly tasks in person was almost enough to dispel his loathing towards the man who had forced him to be here. Almost. The thought of the Supreme Chancellor soured the taste in Kuat of Kuat's mouth instantly. At first, the man had seemed like a sure ally, a loyal customer, maybe even a friend. But after 4 years of the Clone Wars, and countless instances of nationalization of legitimate private industry, Kuat of Kuat had come to see Palpatine for what he really was. The Codger was a blossoming despot, eager to consume and possess everything he could reach, ever watchful for any opportunity he had to take what was not yet his. And this entire battle, Kuat of Kuat knew too well, was just another step in that man's plan for domination. Why else would he have come to the battle himself? Why oversee the liberation of Axum personally? The Supreme Chancellor was, yet again, positioning himself to be seen as the hero of the galaxy, the savior of the people. But when he did, he would not be alone. Thus why Kuat of Kuat had agreed to allow his vaunted mandators to be used in this battle. The core was threatened, and its liberators would be carried on the backs of vessels made in the images rendered by Kuat Drive Yards. When the battle was retold after this, the people of the galaxy would speak the names of the heroes and their ships in hushed and revered voices. And among them would stand Kuat of Kuat and the pride of the core, predominant even over Palpatine and his newly named prosecutor. Without warning, a sudden pain drew him from his thoughts, and he winced in his chair. "Ow! Ow, ow! QB, stop that!" The Lord of Kuat said, trying to shove his feelings out of his lap, the creature suddenly stinging him with its many claws. The beast yowled and growled at its master, and, despite his pushing, only sank its claws more deeply into Kuat of Kuat's ornate uniform, drawing blood from the self-titled technician as it slowly, jerkily turned to face him. But what Kuat of Kuat saw when he looked down into the small, furry face of his erstwhile companion was nothing he recognized. The creature's mouth frothing and bloody, the white of its scleras filling with red, its rapidly, asymmetrically blinking eyes appearing rabid and human. Screaming in sudden terror, Kuat of Kuat barely managed to intercept his maddened pet just as it leapt for his throat, swiping the animal out of the air and throwing it away from his central command chair. The creature landed heavily, having none of its traditional balance, instead flopping and spasming on the floor, seizing out of control. It was only then that the chosen child of House Kuat noticed the chaos slowly devouring his bridge. One of the command officers froze at his station, his hands hovering still over his controls, twitching his head once before suddenly falling over, completely limp and bleeding from his eyes and nose. 2 others, members of ship security, folded in the same way, suffering spontaneous aneurysms. Kuat of Kuat barely understood what was happening, but clearly they were somehow under attack. He pressed himself against the back of his chair, hands fumbling with one of his coat pockets as he produced a pill case, which he flipped open. Inside were portable medications for radiation poisoning, general airborne toxins and plagues, lethal proteins, and even a vial of antidote for the blue shadow virus. He dislodged most of the pills into his palm and choked them down hastily, having no idea from what vector this death was coming, but gratified to see he was not the only one surviving it. However, though most of those around him did not die from the effects of whatever it was which had attacked them, that did not mean that death was the only thing they had to fear. 2 more of the 15 remaining console operators fell out of their chairs, not dead or seizing, but laughing and crying uncontrollably, babbling about voices and speaking in a language Kuat had never heard before. One of his 3 personal guards, who stood just behind his throne, stomped forward, drawing his blaster pistol and brutally executing the 2 laughing men, each shot drawing an involuntary twitch from Kuat of Kuat. But the man did not stop there, pausing for only a moment after he shot the second laughing man before raising his aim and shooting 5 more crewmen who were working at their stations, vacating their skulls of their contents with the superheated plasma of his weapon. He moved to shoot a 6th, but missed, his left hand suddenly reaching out and gripping his right, jerking the shot wide. By then, the other 2 members of his personal security had reacted, blasting the rogue guard with stunning shots, the wide circles zapping and knocking the crazed man unconscious. "What is happening? Somebody tell me what is happening!" Kuat of Kuat demanded in the growing panic which was subsuming not only him, but all the surviving crew on the bridge. Another man jumped to his feet, scrambling in a frenzy and running to the foremost viewport, howling as he ran face first into it, nearly knocking himself unconscious in the process. He staggered up to his feet before slamming his face into the hard transparent steel once, then twice, and then finally he fell to the ground again as he was blasted with several stunning rings. Kuat of Kuat heard a scuffle then, and craned his neck to see his 2 remaining personal guards had fallen upon each other, both rolling around on the ground, each trying to stab the other with their drawn vibro knives.
They are here attacking us,
said Selimi's cool voice. Kuat of Kuat turned to face her, seeing her standing and drawing a blaster pistol from a small holster at her hip. "How? The shield is still..." The Master of Kuat pleaded.
"The shield cannot protect us from this kind of attack. They are too close. Their minds are inside us now,"
she said, tone unchanged as she fired 3 shots into the back of one of the struggling guards. The man convulsed and then went rigid as the guard beneath him finished him off by driving the hypersonic blade he was wielding into the shot guard's heart. Grunting, he shoved the corpse off and rose. "Thanks for that," he said to the blue-skinned woman, but she was paying him no mind, kneeling beside the dead guard, her gloved hands moving through the gear on his belt. "Selimi, what are you doing?" Kuat of Kuat demanded. She stood and looked at him, cold, dispassionate, one eye seeming like it always had, the other eye wild, bloodshot, and the wrong color. She raised a grenade she had taken off the guard's belt, finger hooked through the pin.
"They are inside our minds.
I need to get them out," she explained, her calm demeanor collapsing as she yanked the pin free, holding the explosive in her hand out in front of herself. "Sir, look out!" the guard cried, tackling Kuat of Kuat out of his chair and covering his body with his own. Even so, the resulting blast left the wealthy heir of Planet Kuat stunned and reeling. He had to pull himself out from under the weight of his dead guard, coughing from the smoke produced by the many small fires which surrounded the blast zone. Several others had been caught in the blast, and the bridge was in complete disarray. A quarter of the crew dead or unconscious, another quarter panicking openly, and the remaining half desperately trying to maintain control of the ship's systems. Someone, an officer of the ship, was trying to pull Kuat of Kuat to his feet, but he had no strength left in his legs, an effect born out of his observation of the shield control station. It lay in ruins, the delicate instruments and panels rendered into an inoperable, sparking mess by the explosion which had left Selimi a half-whole corpse smeared across the ground. One of the viewing ports was damaged, a spider web of growing cracks reaching across its surface, before an alarm went off and shutters slammed over it before it could cave out into space. More alarms sounded as emergency medical crews began to storm into the bridge, some coming to kneel beside him, others blasting the fires around them with cold jets of fire suppressant. They were speaking to him, asking him questions, but the man known as Kuat of Kuat was numb to all that was happening around him. His eyes drifting up from the wreckage of the shield control panel to the superheated prow of the enemy dreadnought. "Lord Kuat, we must go! Now!" The officer was yelling, but Kuat of Kuat did not heed him, simply watching with listless eyes as the shield wall around the head of the Imperial vessel finally frayed and burst apart.
Watching the hand of fate descending mercilessly, something suddenly occurred to Kuat of Kuat, and he found the strength to stand, hauling himself up with the help of the nearby officer. But he did not join the man in his futile attempts to escape the inevitable. Instead, he ran back to his command chair, finding one side of it ruined, but the other side, his left side, still being intact enough to work. He began to frenziedly tap out his final systems command, his lithe, professional fingers speeding as the bridge darkened. The light of the nearby star now entirely obscured by the falling head of the Imperial vessel. He jammed the final sequence key, and did not even have enough time for a grim sense of accomplishment. As the bridge and center of the enormous Mandator II was penetrated by the brutal warrior flagship of the fanatic Imperials. His body sucked towards the sudden cracks in the hull before being pulverized into atoms by the impact of the ram. All around them, the Republic task force which had been sent to destroy or delay the Lord Admiral's battle group began to break and scatter, as the heart of their smaller fleet was bored into and the back of the Pride was broken on the knee of Imperial savagery. Above Axum, the sky began to burn. But the world itself was roasting in its own right, and it burned too brightly for most to take notice of the sky's blossoming wounds. Forces from all over the planet were converging on the destined field of slaughter, descending like ravens to scavenge carnage from the infernal final stretch which led to the gates of the Basilica of Salvation. As the bones and blood of spaceborne hulks began to ignite, streaking like fell omens across the day sky of Axum, the canoness of the Emperor's most faithful girded her ancient body for war. Withered limbs slid into armor, frail bones became supported by ceramite. The Sisters of the Order bowed as she rose, a paragon in truth, and dressed as such. The thick, mechanical limbs of the war suit creaked and came alive, the machine's spirit within marrying itself with her own, one never whole without the other. One of her daughters, Leandra, kneeled directly in her path, her head bowed low, her arms raised up, and held in her open palms was their sacred treasure. The ancient warrior took her old weapon and raised it high, the light of the Tabaha'iv illuminating them all like the dawn's sun. Sacred sword in hand, her daughter now stepping aside, Canoness Ishtara Ordain stepped with mechanical might towards the towering golden gates. Those enormous, elaborate constructs which had weathered every attack, every single volley of fell artillery fire, cracked and swung open at her approach, as if even that bulwark could not stand to lie in her path. The burning, screaming battlefield greeted her and her fellow brides of the Emperor. Without fanfare or words, the sacred matron stepped beyond the threshold, her entire order of faithful warriors following in her wake. And then, something more, heralded by a titan's roar. Some sisters spun to look, others even dove for cover, but Ishtara's faith was unyielding and her charge was unbroken, even as the shadow of a leaping Knight Preceptor eclipsed the sun over her head.
The mechanical soldier landed 30 paces in front of the canoness, quaking the streets and towers around them as it did, rising and charging like an avatar of the Emperor's own wrath. Grinning grimly, Ishtara accepted the challenge. Swords raised against a sky wounded with lines of fire and temporary artificial stars, they charged into the fray, blades and flames singing in the wake of the roaring night.
I've looked into the abyss, and I've seen death face to face. I've watched as he took every delicate life away. And at last, when he came for me, I did not run. I greeted him. In the lifeless air, he asked me why there was no fear left behind my sunken eyes. He spoke of how he had visited me many times, watching over each waking nightmare, waiting. I smiled, peering into his dead yellow eyes. There's nothing the end can bring that can haunt me more than this life. And there are no devils in hell. They live in my mind. Awake, I am caged. In dreams, I survive.